This is an SM Media production.
Hi folks, and welcome to the latest episode of The Rewind right here on SM Media. I'm Scott Pike. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host as always. We are now at episode 3. We're going to take a look at Hibs and their infamous golden generation of the mid-2000s. What happened when a group of really exciting young talent emerged at Easter Road and looked to potentially have a team that was capable of splitting the old firm. To join me on to look back in this infamous time in Hibs history is from the Longbangers podcast. A pleasure to welcome Matty Fairnie. Matty, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you back on.
Thanks very much, Scott. Yeah, delighted to be back on.
These are, imagine, better times to look back on than what's been happening the past couple of years, I assume.
Definitely better than the last couple of years. I think for most people my age, and I'm mid-40s, this is one of our sort of peak times. So I don't know anybody my age that doesn't look back at this period with fondness.
To kind of look back at this time, you kind of have to look back to the kind of turn of the century with Hibs and where Hibs were at in terms of kind of getting into the millennium. Hibs had obviously a difficult kind of turn of the century with it getting relegated. Alec McLeish had come in. It brought a real kind of feel-good factor back to Hibs in terms of gaining promotion. That infamous day against Hearts, a 3-0 win, that Millennium Derby. It was a really momentous kind of time for Hibs as well. What was your kind of memories of the kind of early 2000s and when Hibs kind of got back to a stable position? Because it was a kind of bleak few years before that.
Yeah, we'd gone. Well, people blame Jim Duffy for the relegation. McLeish had actually taken over just before we got relegated. But in the Championship, or I think it was the First Division back then, he managed to put together a cracking team. So the two sort of stars that he brought in were Frank Stosey and Russell Latipi, both of whom should, by rights, have never been anywhere near that level of football. But they were a fantastic team to watch. I mean, you mentioned the 3-0, the Millennium Derby, but we're a 6-2 against Hearts at Easter Road, which is one of these games that's gone down in folklore with Hibs fans. And just the brand of football that they played, and particularly when Latipi was on form, it was just fantastic. I mean, we would blow teams away at times, and we had David Satelli up front. I think Mark Libra came in under McLeish as well. He was a cracking forward. Stuart Lovell, John O'Neill, and you could go right through the team and pick out sort of class players. Ulrich Larsson that went to Celtic. I mean, talk about a feel-good factor. I mean, McLeish definitely brought it back in droves.
Kenny Miller as well in that team as well. He'd emerged a real proper kind of exciting talent at the time as well, didn't he?
Kenny Miller burst onto the scene and he was just like this wee whip hit. There was nothing to him, but he was had all the pace and he could finish, and you could tell sort of early doors that the boy was going to have a good career.
Yeah. The 2000-2001 season, obviously that Celtic defeat in the cup final, but that was a real kind of exciting run to get to that cup final. I mean, we look back at that time, I'm just looking at a 6-1 win over Clyde, beating Livingston 3-0 in the semi-final as well, but Celtic, that was Celtic going for the treble. Celtic were just a different class in that day.
Celtic were excellent. We had just before it, in the run-up, so Latipi had gone out with, he was pals with York, and they'd gone out on the Randan in Edinburgh, and he got done for drink driving, I think, and Hibs sacked him, pretty much. And I think if Latipi had been available, it would have been a different cup final. Now, Sosie was just coming back for injury as well, and I think Sosie was maybe 70% fit for that one. And you met Celtic were a fantastic team back then. I mean, they're kind of consistently a good team anyway, but that side was good, and we just had too much for us on the day.
Get into the kind of 2001 season, kind of McLeish was obviously getting noticed. The Rangers job comes up when Advocat leaves. What was the kind of feeling when McLeish was leaving? Did you kind of understand that was the job he always wanted, or what was your kind of memories of that time?
I remember a big backlash against McLeish for going. You think I don't know, I can't remember exactly the time frame between him sort of standing in front of the Hibs fans saying, "I'm here as long as you want me," kind of thing. When the news was just breaking about Rangers being interested, and he'd sort of made a big song and dance about staying, and then the next thing you know, he's got the scarf above his head at Ibrox, and a lot of Hibs fans didn't really forgive him after that. They held that against him for quite a long time, and it was a big blow because the team was good. McLeish was obviously going places as a manager, and you felt that Hibs could have maybe done something. Although that said, the side that he'd built was on the slide a wee bit. By the time he left, it's like almost like kind of leaving at the right time for him, knowing what was coming down the road for Hibs, because we were having to look at some significant cost cutting at the club.
And a couple of days after McLeish leaves and obviously goes to Rangers, Donald Park takes over as assistant, kind of for the assistant manager and the caretaker. But Frank Sosey gets promoted to be the manager now. Frank Sosey, I would imagine, would have been a great appointment with the fans at the time, just because obviously this top player who came in obviously still showed he'd got it, but it was promoting from within. And obviously Sosey, I think a lot of people would have been hoping that he would have converted his playing skills into managerial skills when he got the job.
I think the biggest problem for Frank Sosey when he took over as manager is he didn't have Frank Sosey on the pitch. He was by far and away our best player, and he stopped playing immediately. It wasn't like he kind of kept going player manager for a little while. He just sort of made that break. And there's a lot of debate with Hibs fans whether he should have been given more time. I think he only had like 9 games or something like that. I mean, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, 69 days.
69 days, yeah, there you go. I mean, we weren't great under Sosey. I think because the Hibs fans all love him so much, they would have given him the time. The fans would definitely give him the time, but the board obviously made that decision to pull the trigger on him. But it was a gutting time because I think every Hibs fan that loves Sosey almost just compartmentalises that wee managerial spell, puts it to one side and pretends it never happened. And we all just love him still.
And obviously with Sosey, I think the big thing as well is the St Johnstone were creeping up as well, and I think he gets sacked just before that St Johnstone game. So it was a kind of weird time for the club. Like if Hibs had lost that game with Sosey in charge, would Hibs have stayed in the division? Would the time we're going to talk about ever have happened?
Who knows? Who knows? I love to think in my wee fantasy. I always think Sosey would have turned it around and went on to great things with us, but yeah, the likelihood is it probably wouldn't have happened.
And Sosey, it's kind of telling that he never went back into management.
Yeah, I think the experience, but he's actually never been back at Hibs since then.
Has he not? No.
He's come in. He got involved with the Hanlon Stevenson Foundation as an ambassador just recently. And I think Hibs are bringing him out at the Motherwell game. And I think that'll be his first time back at Easter Road since they got sacked, which is incredible, really.
Yeah, I would never have believed that. But 2 days after that, Bobby Williamson comes in, kind of for Kilmarnock. He'd done a really good job at Kilmarnock. I think he's really underrated for his time at Kilmarnock because he took that team to a team that should never have been finishing third and fourth, and had done really well. What was your thoughts when you heard Williamson was coming in?
I think we were kind of. I suppose it was a level of excitement. He's won the Scottish Cup with Kilmarnock as well, I think. And the candidates around at that point, Williamson was probably the one that was like the obvious one really to go for. I don't think anybody was enthused about the style of football that he was known for, but we would all have taken the third and fourth finishes. Hands down, like no question, we would have taken that. And if he was a sort of stabilising influence in the club, I think we all would have accepted that. I think that's kind of how he turned out.
And round about this time, obviously, this is the time you'll remember when basically if you had a foreign name, you could get a contract in Scottish football.
Aye.
I'm just going to run through a few of these names that we're going to obviously talk about a real good crop of Scottish players, but give us your memories. And like Paco Luna was there, Hulis is still a cruise. Now, the other two that I would say were probably quite decent. But you then go into like Lillian Martin, Lyndon Andrews, Alan Orman. There's a weird mixture. There's some that work out really well. There's some that don't.
Orman was no bad. I think he's scored an absolute raker at Ibrox. That's what you remember about Orman. I think he had a seizure. I can't remember if it was the same game or he had a seizure on the pitch, which was a worry for everybody.
That's right, actually, yeah.
So Orman was all right. Dela Cruz was a good signing. Like he was a reported record fee. I think it was reported at $750,000 we paid for him, but I don't think it was actually anywhere close
He
to
went on
that.
to Aston Villa, didn't he?
He did, yeah. We sold him for a few million. I think he's still. Maybe McGinn surpassed him, but he was a record sale for a long time. So De La Cruz was decent, but some of the players that were kicking about the club at that point were just instantly forgettable, really.
And that was the same everywhere, wasn't it? It was just that crazy time the TV money was in, and as I say, you were basically you could have just had a foreign name. You could have changed your name to a foreign sounding name, and you would have probably got a decent contract at an SPL club.
I think it was only Dundee that were signing the superstars, like Ravanelli and Caniggia and
there was that thing, but that obviously the money kind of dried up at the time. And
definitely, yeah.
This is the kind of beginning of when we see these kind of players emerging. Like Ian Murray had obviously done pretty well. He'd been there a few years before that, but in this season, the 2001-2002 season, Gary O'Connor, Derek Riordan, Gary Caldwell, Stephen Whittaker makes his first appearance as well. Early thoughts, did you hear it? Did you hear anything about these guys? Was there a lot of expectations on them when they were emerging?
No, there wasn't a lot of noise. I remember a long time ago, I used to cover under-19 games for Hibs for their website, and I was speaking to the coach at the time, James McDonough, and he said that these boys were not knocking down the manager's door for a game. They got played because out of necessity. Hibs had drastic cost cutting, and it was basically play the kids, or we didn't have anybody to play that we could afford. So they got into the team, and I think they probably benefited from having that early exposure to that level of football, and they grasped the opportunity with both hands. It's fair to say they weren't stellar under Williamson when he sort of brought them through. They were good, and we had the CIS Cup run where we beat Rangers at Hampden in the semi-final, and they looked like they were maybe going to do something there. But that was probably the highlight of the Williamson era. It was only really later on, which we'll come on to, where they really took off.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that 2002-2003 season, it does not start well. A 5-1 defeat away to Hearts, a 4-2 defeat at home to Rangers in the first 4 games. It didn't start great, that 2002-2003 season. And
pretty grim.
Pretty grim. And it seems to kind of turn around about the kind of middle of kind of September and October, when there's a lot more kind of results. I mean, a 5-game winning run, but there was a bit of stability as well. And again, you see the likes of there's more players coming through. There's a lot of these kind of guys beginning to make a serious claim. And it's a good Scottish core as well. You've got the likes of Tam McManus. Obviously, I know Pat Linen isn't Scottish, but obviously was well known to Scottish football. John O'Neill was there, like as we mentioned, Ian Murray, Gary Smith. There's a real Scottish core. Do you think they were good for the youngsters' development?
Definitely. I mean, Mixu in particular was a great influence on the squad. He had like a really good mentality about him. He'd been at the club and left and come back again. John O'Neill, I think John O'Neill eventually left because we couldn't afford to play him.
Yeah, he got a great contract somewhere.
He was a fantastic player, but I think you're right, that kind of core of experienced players that were there, they weren't just experienced, but they were also good players. So the young players coming through into that environment definitely had sort of really good role models around them.
And then obviously you mentioned the financial problems. Bobby Williamson, I think just his own contract his contract was getting renegotiated as well, when he ended up taking a job at Plymouth, which I think was really surprising. But do you kind of understand that as well? And what was that kind of reaction when he left?
I think by the time that Bobby Williamson left, he'd lost a lot of the Hibs support. There's a lot of folk had been disillusioned with the style of play. It was very pragmatic, and I think in his defence, knowing what he had to work with, he probably did what he had to do. But there was a lot of surprise that he went on to another club. I think folk were expecting him to kind of get the bullet at Hibs around about the time that he left. And so when the news about him moving to Plymouth came up, it was sort of a win-win for everybody. I think it was one of these moves that just suited all parties, and they sort of left on good terms with the club. There's not that many Hibs fans will have a lot of bad things to say about him, other than the wee complaints about the style of football. But I think in retrospect, knowing what he had to deal with, folk would probably look kindly on the job that he did at Hibs.
Yeah, I think he's a very underrated manager. He's not a manager you look back and like you actually really kind of, when you look at his actual jobs that he did, at particularly Kilmarnock and Hibs, he actually did okay. He didn't do terrible. But towards the end, he obviously leaves in April, and I think it's Jerry McCabe stays on to the end of the season. But Tony Mowbray gets appointed now. It was a real kind of shot in the dark with Tony Mowbray. He'd obviously been a Celtic player. He'd been well known to Scottish football, but he'd spent a bit of time with Ipswich under George Burley as well. He'd kind of learned his trade. What was the kind of reaction when you heard that Mowbray was getting the job?
Total surprise. It came out of nowhere. I think even up to the day when he was announced, the rumours that were flying about was, I think it was Alan Kernahan. He used to play for St Johnstone, maybe. Mm-hmm. The rumour was that he was a stick-on for the job, and that's who it was going to be. And then I remember the announcement, we've got Tony Mowbray, and I was sitting in my living room and I was thinking, Tony Mowbray, what? And I just couldn't see it, where it come from. But then as soon as he started speaking, and literally I think this is a feeling that was shared across the support, everybody had that kind of WTF moment at the start. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as he started talking about this expansive brand of football, and it was a phrase he used, like an upward spiral at the club is what he wanted to do, just to have this sort of attacking philosophy, playing football the way that Hibs fans want to see the team playing. I think very quickly people bought into it, very, very quickly. He just came across totally different from the perception that you would have had of him as a player.
And he comes in and he brings it. We'll touch a bit in his signings in his first season, but Scott Brown emerges. You've got the likes of Kevin Thomson, Stephen Whittaker, Stephen Fletcher even comes in this summer as well. Stephen Dobie's there. There's a lot of really exciting. That it begins to now become a real generation of young talent. Who kind of stood out for you when you, like, for the first time you seen him? Who really stood out as a good player?
Fletcher was a funny one. I remember looking back at, because if folk would talk about Stephen Fletcher, and a lot of people would complain he was only like one-footed, very, very reliant on his left foot, which was crazy because he was a fantastic player. When he didn't play, you saw how good he was. It's like all the things that you take for granted. As soon as he was out of the team, you're like, we're nowhere near as good. If Fletcher was good, Riordan was incredible when he burst onto the scene, and the goals that Riordan scored were magnificent. I mean, he would score every type of goal you could imagine. The screamers in the top corner, the tap-ins, the wee dribbles, and beating a few players before tucking it away. He had a wee bit of everything, rather than an attitude to kind of go with it. You know, the haircut, they all had the haircuts, didn't they, in that, at that time. It's hard to pinpoint. Scott Brown as well. I remember hearing a story about Scott Brown as he was just breaking into the team, and I think he'd played a reserve game, and he was up against Stephen Presley, because Brown started in as a forward at Hibs, and the story goes he was just in his ear the whole time saying, "You're not good enough to play me." Stephen Presley is Scotland international at this point. It's like, "You're not good enough. You're not good enough to play against me, Presley. I'll do this to you and that to you." And that just kind of summed Scott Brown up.
And that was the thing with Brown as well. When obviously when we think of Scott Brown now, we think of him as this amazing holding midfielder that would kind of break play up, but he was a real forward going player. And I specifically remember that period he played with a broken leg.
Aye, there was. I think he broke it against Hearts when they played on, and I mean that sums Scott Brown up. He played through a broken leg,
and you just think of that at the time, like how it shows you the kind of courage he had. But he was a really exciting talent going forward, and we'll touch on obviously later on, and just when it becomes the stage when they move on and how it becomes a kind of bidding war basically. But we'll touch on the players they brought in over that summer to complement this youth team. Julian Bousselin. He was unbelievable. Remember, he was a brilliant player.
Yeah, he bought right into the club as well. And he's back at the club just now in a sort of coaching role. Boozy just had that sort of composure and calmness in the middle of the field where he could sort of spray the passes about and let everybody else do the running. He was a terrific signing, and out of nowhere as well.
There's a guy I want to touch on who only played one game, but I think he had an impact in Mowbray in his backroom staff, Mark Venus.
Aye, Mark. Did Venus get a game? Did he?
He played one game, but I remember him. Obviously, I don't know if he became. He was
assistant manager. Yeah,
but he's assistant at Celtic as well. And he was very key to how Mowbray operated. Yeah,
well, there was a lot of talk about Venus getting the job after Mowbray left. That's funny. I had no recollection of him playing it at all.
He played one game.
Yeah, it's like new news that. terrific player, Hibs legend.
Yeah.
It was definitely a big influence. Him and Mowbray worked really well. I think they just had that sort of chemistry between them. They definitely worked for Hibs.
Dean Shields coming in as well for Arsenal. He emerged as quite a good talent as well.
He was a really good player. He's probably underrated, even though he ended up at Rangers, didn't he? Like he kind of, moved on. I think it was when Rangers were having their troubles that he played for them. But he was again very talented player, but no guaranteed a start. That's kind of tells you how good a team we had at that point. That you got players like Dean Shields that sometimes they start, sometimes they wouldn't.
The one that really caught my eye when he came in was David Murphy. He came in, he was a free agent from Middlesbrough. Shows you how I think Mowbray had a wee bit of a good eye in the English market. He got him really cheap for no money, and he emerged as such a key player in that Hibs team.
Well, Murphy's he came in pre-season, and the perception was he was overweight. Everybody was kind of looking at him going, "Who's this boy?" And then a ball got fired across at him, and he just took it down first time. Murphy's first touch it's still legendary to this sort of this day when you talk to Hibs fans, and he was fantastic. Like he just. A total surprise package.
And it, obviously as well, he comes in and he immediately just hits the ground running. It's not a brilliant start. There's a couple of defeats, but obviously once he gets a few wins on the board, and there's a difference in how they play. How was that? How much more refreshing was it to see a kind of breed of attacking football with this young talent coming through?
It was amazing. So Hibs, for the rocky start that we had under Mowbray, he came out. I think it was the first game. It was a 4-4 draw, maybe we were 4-2 up and then ended up drawing 4-4. I think it'd be a bit hazy with my memory of that, but early days you could see the style of play emerging, and Mowbray came out and said, "Listen, we're going to make mistakes, a young team, but if we keep playing like this, we'll win more than we lose," and everybody was on board with that. Like there was very few complaints, and you could just see this sort of cavalier brand of football coming through, and the place was buzzing. Like every week you were turning up, and you didn't know what you were going to get. You knew you would get a team that was going to have a right good go, but we would take everybody on. There was no, we didn't always win, but it didn't matter if it was Rangers, Celtic, Hearts, Aberdeen. We'd come and just try and beat them. There was no sitting in for a draw or anything like that. And we would try to do it playing the way that we always played.
And great. Another player that comes in at that point for a £5,000 fee from Institute in Northern Ireland, Ivan Sproul. Could you see very early on just how good he was?
No,
no.
Ivan took a while to settle. He did not really much on his debut. He came on at Hampden, didn't do very much there. He was on the verge of leaving the club to go back to Ireland, and basically, I think we got an injury, and then he played, and I think that was when he got the hat trick at Ibrox, and that was him. He kind of went down in Hibs legend after that. He developed at Hibs, a right good player, but he struggled at first to kind of hit the heights.
And the whole thing with this kind of team is, obviously we'll touch on later on, they all go for decent money. Was there any whispers before they eventually did go that there was maybe talk? Because you know as well as I do, if you're a team in Scottish football and you've got a lot of young talent, it's very likely that they all get sold on relatively early on. What was your kind of memories of was there any whispers before they eventually did go that they were going to get sold?
So we knew Hibs needed the money. I think Gary O'Connor was the first one to go for any sort of decent money, and Hibs sold them just as we were about to go into semi-final against Hearts, which was disastrous. Like we got absolutely hammered in that semi-final, and when he went, you started to kind of get the sense that this is what's going to happen. This team is going to get broken up, and there's too much talent there for Hibs to hold on to. I think Gary Caldwell left for Celtic for decent money. Ulrich Larsson had gone previously. Ian Murray had gone. You could see it breaking up, but you just had that you hoped we would hold on to them long enough to do something.
And obviously across the city around about this point, Hearts begin to emerge as a real threat, obviously under Burley. Was there a bit of jealousy there, or did you still have the feeling that Hibs had a really good side, or was there a lot of focus on how well Hearts were doing?
Well, Hearts had I think they were 9 or 10 unbeaten at the start of the season under Burley, and then they sacked him, which was bonkers. But that was kind of like bonkers time for Hearts anyway.
And we'll cover that in the next episode.
Very interesting, I'm afraid. I don't know about jealousy. I think we knew the value of the players that we had, and they could be competitive. But then we took a few sore ones for Hearts that said, like we were capable of beating them, and we did beat them a few times. But we also took a few sore ones for them, and I think that was when you kind of realised that actually that's what happens if you spend millions and millions on a team compared to one that's been brought together through the ranks and then held together by the skin of its teeth, which is what we were doing.
And Hibs go to Ibrox to their first victory there since 1995. Ivan Sproul would come on as a second half sub for Gary O'Connor and battered Rangers a 3-0, a really poor Rangers side, but Hibs were outstanding that day, and Sproul in particular stood out, and that was a feeling I had that day of, right, this Hibs team are really serious. They could be a real serious contender.
What was funny about that is McLeish after the game. So McLeish, obviously in charge of Rangers at this point, described it as a smash and grab, 3-0 smash and grab. But I think that was when you saw what the team was capable of, and we counter-attacked well. And for all, like Hibs had a lot of trouble with goalkeepers in that period. That's probably the other sort of standout thing for the golden generations. If we'd had a Craig Gordon level player coming through, we would have done better, but Mowbray had a habit of signing dud goalkeepers. But that game, I think it was Simon Brown or Malkowski that was in goal for it, but they had a cracking game. And then Scott Brown was brilliant in that game as well. When Sproul came on, I remember Gary O'Connor, the story is he's going off. He says to Mowbray, what the F is he going to do? He was complaining about getting off, and then 20 minutes later or whatever, there you go, 3 goals in the back.
And was there a feeling leaving Ibrox that day that there was a real kind of possibility that this side was, because if you remember, Rangers finished third, Hearts finished second. There's a chance here. Did you think that at the time?
I think Hibs had that feeling anyway. We knew we were capable of playing like that. It was just I don't know if any, as a Hibs fan, you know not to get too carried away. I think that's sort of the thing. You get a result like this, but there's every chance. Like I say, Hibs will go to Ibrox, win 3-0, and then the next game lose 2-0 to Hamilton. It's just that's sort of the Hibs way, isn't it? So we didn't get too carried away, but you could see the potential was there.
Was it a good feeling as well ending Hearts' winning run with that 2-0 win at Boozlin and O'Connor scored? Outstanding.
Aye. And that was the Hearts fans rocked up to Easter Road. That absolutely certain that they were going to blow us away. And I think what we saw at that point was the character for the Hibs side. It wasn't just that we could be cavalier and have this attack, and was it Lennon called as the boy band image? But Hibs battled that game and were well worth the 2-0 win. It was a brilliant result. And
it's interesting you say that about character, because I've got a wee thing here about, obviously, the 27th of November, Hibs play Rangers again at Easter Road this time, and it's a 2-1 win for Hibs. And Mowbray's asked that day how he feels about a title challenge, and he plays it down. And it's interesting when you look the 2 games after that, it's 2 away defeats to Dundee United and Celtic. And I've always wondered, and you might disagree, was that pressure that was the kind of, when it was asked about the title challenge, did that have an effect on the players in the 2 games after that?
I don't know. It might have done, but I think there would have been, if you look at the results that season, there would have been other examples as have following up a really good result with a bad result. So I don't know. I don't think anybody at the club would have believed that we would have had a title challenge. I think this is the difference between Hibs and Hearts at that time. Because Hearts had chucked that much money at it, and there was that much craziness going on. And because they I think they ended up splitting Old Firm. They genuinely believed that they could do it. They spent the money and were having like a real serious tilt at it. Hibs always looked like we just never had enough about us to sustain it. We could turn the results in, but there was always that chance of the bad results as well. And you look at the end of the season, Hibs won 17 games, but they lose 16, and it is crazy. And you just wonder if a few of them had, because there's 17 points between Rangers and Hibs that season. You just wonder, like, if Hibs had got a run going, would they have been able to mount a challenge? It's one of those you look back on with. Aye, I think if we could have got a run, it's that thing. Like, even if we turned some of those defeats into draws and stayed a bit closer, or just had that sort of consistency, beating the weird team, in inverted commas, the weird teams. then maybe we would have had the challenge. It's funny looking back. We definitely had the quality. We just never had the strength and depth was missing.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned there about obviously Gary O'Connor going to Lokomotiv Moscow. Obviously, that was a good financial deal for the club and probably O'Connor himself. But losing O'Connor, was that the kind of? Did you feel that was the beginning of this kind of break-up in this team?
Aye. So O'Connor going, and when he went, I think what it did was there was a big question mark about the ambition of the club because of the timing of it. And I think it's one of these things where it would have been really unfair. In hindsight, being totally objective about it, it would have been really unfair on Gary O'Connor for the club to have not sold him. But if we were being ambitious as a football club, and knowing that we've got this big game coming up, we wouldn't have, you wouldn't sell your best player. You would try to keep a hold of them. And I think when you know that that's the position the club are in, and they're having to sell players to kind of make ends meet, and that's at the expense of the sporting ambition, you knew that it just told you what you needed to know about the club, right? Like there was no realistic opportunity for us to go and invest in the team, to go chasing Hearts or Celtic or Rangers. It was just going to be, it's good to know eventually this is not going to be quite as good because they're all going to go.
And getting into that next season, we'll touch on obviously what happens at the end, but a slow start, 11 points from 9 games. What was kind of different? How was it kind of? How do you remember the start of that season? Because it wasn't great when you look at results.
I think we just thought it was taking a wee while to get going. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be a bad season, or that we would be in any trouble. I think we just thought we're not quite clicked into gear yet. Because sometimes some of the games, the results didn't necessarily match the performances, and that's probably true for quite a few of the losses that Hibs had over that period. That we probably deserved a bit more for the games.
And Mowbray and Venus signed a new rolling contract. Did you get the feeling with that, like when they secured their future? Although it was a 12-month rolling contract, but did you get the feeling that they were going to be here for the long haul?
That's a really good question. I think when they signed the contract, I'd probably, at a time where I would have been naive enough to think this is a good thing and we're going to have them for a while. I think for folk who'd been around the block a bit more than I had at that point, they would have seen the writing on the wall. And I should have learned from McLeish actually. McLeish going, having said that he would be there for as long as we wanted him, you kind of knew that managers didn't stay around for it's still the case now. It's the same for every club, really, isn't it? That unless you're right at the top end, unless you're a Man City or a Liverpool or a team like that, you're not going to hold on to manager. If they're successful, a bigger fish will come along and take them.
And Riordan and Caldwell obviously going to Celtic as well. Like, you must have thought that Riordan would go on and kick on to be a top player with Celtic. And what do you think happened there?
Probably best not to speculate the rumours. I mean, there was all sorts of rumours flying about, but I think most of them boiled down to him and Strachan not getting on.
Yeah.
It was just a waste. Like I think he still did. Like if you look at his stats at Celtic, they were all right. Like they're not terrible. But Riordan, he was always like the unrealised talent. I think everybody thought he had the potential to go the furthest out of everybody. And that move just never worked out for him. And I think he probably stayed at Celtic longer than he should have done. And by the time he came back to Hibs, he wasn't quite the player that left. Yeah, it was a real shame because, like I said, if he'd had a kind wind behind him, he could have gone on to be like a Scotland great and maybe made it down in England, but it just never worked out.
When do you first hear that Mowbray's been approached by West Brom?
I remember sort of seeing it the news was coming through in the forums, like early days at Hibs.net.
Yeah.
We would have seen the chat about it, and I think generally by the time it was getting onto those places, there had a fair chance that it was going to happen. I remember being absolutely devastated though. I mean, I absolutely loved Tony Mowbray's time at Hibs, and when you have this end of an era and knowing what we'd come from with Bobby Williamson's style, and there was nobody really kind of kicking about at that point that was like Mowbray. That you thought, well, there's a like for like replacement here that we could pull in. I was gutted, absolutely gutted when he started to move. And
he's kind of become a figure, and obviously his time at Celtic just didn't work. But you look back at that Hibs run he had, and he was a brilliant manager.
Outstanding. And like I said, the Hibs fans that are my age will look back at that team just with nothing but fondness.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously a replacement is needed, and it's another kind of left field appointment that Hibs go for. And you can't say Hibs didn't think outside the box during this time. They go for John Collins. Now, John Collins obviously been a really effective player for Celtic. And I don't know if you know this, but John Collins played in Monaco.
I think he's said it before, But...
Yeah, but the reason we say that in kind of tongue-in-cheek way is that he obviously developed some systems in Monaco which will kind of play a part later on here. But when Collins came in and he was appointed, and he'd obviously spoke about that kind of fitness regime they wanted to implement and things like that, was there an excitement with Collins, or was that a thing of like, this, will this work in Scottish football? Will this work with this Hibs team that are very focused on getting the ball down, playing it quicker, whereas you're going from a bit of a difference now to a kind of real focus and fitness and getting behind the ball?
Well, I think Collins, when he came on, I thought it was a really ambitious move. And Collins talked about passing. So all the noise he made, it was passing, possession, football, attacking, keeping the ball, being brave. I mean, he made all the right noises. He had the fitness, but he brought in a guy, was it George Propos, I think was the fitness coach. Big fanfare about this fitness coach coming in and how he was going to take us to the next level. And I think we had... Will Collins, we were building the training centre out at East Mains, which was sort of the legacy of, was it Scott Brown's sale or Fletcher's sale? I can't remember. One of them, anyway. For the millions that we brought in, for them, they built this new training facility. And you just thought, everything's starting to fall into place here. We've got a manager who's been there, seen it, done it at the highest level, played World Cups, played English Premiership, played for Monaco, worked with Arsene Wenger, I think, when he was there, and he just seemed to tick all the boxes. And actually, Collins had a great start at Hibs. It was only sort of towards the end of his time that it really went south.
And I mean, they get that top six finish, and the thing with Collins is, and obviously there's the results he comes in, there's a real lack of consistency when you look at, there's no run. I mean, there's not a run of two games a win from December onwards, and it just shows. Was there this kind of consistency problem at the time?
There definitely was. I mean, we were capable of some brilliant performances under Collins. So I think his first game at Easter Road, Derby, League Cup game against Hearts, we win 1-0, but it's the biggest pumping 1-0. I think the stats on the night were something 81% possession to Hibs. Craig Gordon stopped it being 5-6, 7-0. Hibs absolutely hammered them. And you saw what the team were capable of. We had another game at Ibrox where I think David Murphy scores. We win 1-0. Bouzoulin's pulling the strings, and we're giving it the Olays. You know, that's how comfortable we were in that game. And I think we won that to go top of the league under Collins. And you talk about having the sense under Mowbray. Probably it was more of a sense that after that game, but consistency is, as always, is the killer for him. So we just. They never string it together long enough.
Aye, and although the league form isn't great, the League Cup is beginning. Obviously, Mowbray had won the first two games of that run, but he comes in, Collins comes in and obviously beats Hearts in the quarter final. How would you remember about that result?
I've just been blown away by it. I mean, like I was saying there, Hibs were everything that you want for a football team that night, other than we could have been more clinical finishing. But it was a great night under the lights. I can't remember if it was a Friday night. It was definitely like a midweek night. Just like a really nice night, and just battering them. It was just relentless Hibs attack, and that was sort of Collins laying down a marker for what he wanted for the team. And if we'd kept that up, to be fair, if we could have got that out of the team every week, we would have been challenging.
Yeah. Definitely, and the semi-final was obviously at Hampden, Tynecastle actually.
St Johnson.
St Johnson, and that thing we were speaking about, the fitness, it obviously goes into extra time, 1-1. But Murphy and Benjamin was
Benji.
He was in Morocco up front.
Yeah, him and Benji and Zaman were the two Moroccans that they played. Hibs were really good. I think we were a wee bit unlucky that it went to extra time that night. But once we got into extra time, it was quite an even game. I'm trying to think back to it. It was a good game. So Johnson definitely made a right good game of it. But we got the goal and then we scored the third one sort of right towards the end. And remember that Benjamin running through, and he sort of clips the heels of the boy that's running with him. So he falls on his backside, and Benji's then left unmarked to tap it in at the back post. And they all went mental about it, obviously, as you would. But when we got that win, you felt we would win the cup. I think definitely you saw that team was capable of it.
Yeah, and I mean this is kind of the whole symbol of this team is that game against Kilmarnock in that League Cup final. It's a 5-1 victory, and it is probably I've spoken to a lot of ex-Kilmarnock players about it, and they said Hibs just blew them away that game. But you actually look at it, and it was 1-0 at 58 minutes.
Crazy, eh?
And it just showed you this Hibs team. They did have superior fitness. And they went on and obviously scored 4 goals in the last 30 minutes. What was your memories of that day when you look back on it? What kind of stands out?
It was the first thing was the weather. The weather was wild that day, so we had pretty much every season in that one game. So when Rob Jones scored the opener, it was snowing. I think by the time Fletcher scores the last goal, it's sunny, and we had torrential rain through there. And I remember going 3-0. And Kilmarnock got a goal back and panicking because this is what Hibs are like. It's sort of going, no again. And then we just scored the fourth. And it was much more comfortable than it felt at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The time the fourth one, everybody celebrated. We knew we were going to win it then. But at 3-0, you just thought, what are we going to fold here? Is it going to be one of these games where we've been so on top that we just have a bit of a setback and then collapse? But we had Andy McNeil, it's a young goalkeeper.
Yeah.
It was one of the things Colin did was dropped Malkowski and Simon Brown, brought in Andy McNeil, who wasn't a great goalkeeper to be fair, but I think the fans got behind him because he'd come through the youth. Lewis Stevenson played that game and he got man of the match. Yeah. He had a cracking game. I remember Mikey Stewart didn't play. He sat with his face tripping him for most of the game as well. It was an incredible day. I mean, the Hibs don't win that many cups, and to win it 5-1. And that was probably the first time we'd had proper Sunshine on Leith playing en masse at that level.
Yeah, and that's the thing that sticks out to me when I kind of watched the highlights of this to kind of prepare for this. And you saw Collins, and I think he'd lost his dad around about that time as well. I think there was and you just saw this very emotional guy, and you just thought, right, this could work. Did you get that feel at the time that this? He was kind of, the players had bought into it more than anything. Did you think that at the time? Obviously, we'll touch on. They certainly didn't, but
yeah, I think at that point, yeah, we were looking good in the Scottish Cup as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that one trophy, and I think we started looking ahead, thinking we might. There's an outside chance of us doing a double. I think we had Dunfermline in the semi-final.
Yeah,
the Scottish Cup. We looked. It looked like it was all coming together. Yeah, definitely. Like that, there was a togetherness about the players. It looked like they were all right behind the manager. There was certainly no sign of what was to come.
No.
At that point.
Aye, and it's kind of tough to put this kind of into words because Thomson obviously leaves as well when Thomson goes to Rangers, and there was talk obviously Brown and Thomson. I think there was a lot of talk that they were going to go to the other clubs they went to. So I think Brown was going to Rangers, Thomson was going to Celtic, but they were two massive losses at the time. Do you not agree?
They were, yeah. And so Scott Brown stayed on to win the cup.
Yeah.
And there were sort of stories about them both handing in transfer requests after one of the games. They'd had it tucked in their socks, and there was a bit of animosity between the players and the support. There was a bit of disconnect there because the fans weren't really keen on how they'd handled things. I think their agent was Willie Mackay at the time, and he was getting a lot of flack for sort of stirring it. There was a lot of noise in the Daily Record, so the Daily Record was sort of like public enemy number one with the Hibs fans as well. Collins stripped Thomson of the captaincy. I think he dropped him for some games, and I think there was a quote in the record that Thomson saying he'd crawl over broken glass to get to Ibrox, which you can imagine that the Hibs fans just were like, well, it's not very good.
No.
To put it mildly.
And it's that thing as well, obviously, like, I've always wondered this with kind of Hibs fans. How do you, when you see like Thomson and Brown, they're going to Rangers and Celtic, and obviously that is the kind of next level. Is there an understanding with Hibs fans, like you kind of like the fact that they're going to a higher level, or obviously is there that kind of animosity that they're going? Because like if Kevin Thomson and Scott Brown went to West Brom, for example, with Mowbray, would there have been that level up? Would there have been that much controversy, do you think?
No, not at all. So I think a lot of it comes down to how they leave the club. So if you take Ulrich Larsson, who I spoke about earlier on, when he left Hibs to go to Celtic, I think everybody just wished him well. He was a good player for Hibs. He knew he was too good for us, and he would go on to better things. Riordan, when he went to Celtic, so Riordan actually refused to sign a contract, but I can't remember. But basically, the way it was going to pan out, he signed a pre-contract with Celtic. We were going to get nothing for him, and then there was a wee bit wheeling and dealing in the background, and we ended up getting a wee bit of money for him. Scott Brown, because he stayed on to win the cup and didn't force the issue, he went with more good wishes for Hibs fans than bad. Kevin Thomson, because it was so disruptive the way that he left, even though he's come back to Hibs since, played for free, won the Scottish Cup, or been part of the squad that won the Scottish Cup, there's still a lot of Hibs fans that just do not like him and still hold that against him.
And it's a weird thing, isn't it? It's, as you say, I mean, if the manager's job come up probably tomorrow, you would probably say Kevin Thomson would maybe be in contention for it, but you would probably have a lot of Hibs fans that wouldn't like it.
Aye, Thomson, I think, Hibs would be mental if they hired Thomson as a manager. And for all he's a Hibs fan in inverted commas, I think he just has that perception that he goes on. There was a commentary game, Rangers Hibs at Ibrox. He was commentating for Rangers TV, and it was we this, we that, we. And Hibs fans just kind of see that and go, right, well, you're obviously not a Hibs fan, and because of the history there, they just would not take them. If Hibs brought in Kevin Thomson as a manager, be carnage with the support.
But obviously the Collins era was to end pretty strangely. Reports in the media emerged of obviously a dispute between Collins and the Hibs players. Now, Collins has obviously said a few times publicly that he wanted to get a training camp, and kind of emerged like a real it was like a boot camp, a proper fitness boot camp, wasn't it? And
yeah,
I don't think the players certainly liked that, and plus I think as well the players weren't happy with the kind of chopping and changing of formation in the team quite a lot. Like, what did you kind of think of that at the time? Because when a manager and a player fall out is public, you're either on one side or the other.
I think initially a lot of Hibs fans backed Collins with it because they were like, well, it's the players being unprofessional. And then you sort of hear a wee bit more about it, and sort of, if you're being pragmatic, you think, well, they're all grown-ups. I think Collins had taken away their energy drinks. It was all water, so there was like no alcohol, energy drinks. They weren't allowed out past a certain time, and I think what was potentially going to be like a really constructive bonding training camp, and I can't remember where it was. It was Portugal, maybe. It turned into a huge negative with the players falling out with the manager, but certainly at the time, and it's probably different now with folk looking at it in hindsight. But at the time, there's a lot of support for Collins for it because they thought he wants to take us to the next level, and the players are just no up for it. I think remember Le Guin had the same at Rangers.
Yeah,
but he faced that sort of backlash for trying to set higher standards, and they wanted to deliver.
And I remember at this time as well, I've spoke to Rob Jones about this. He's been on the show, and I've asked him about the statement he had to make about the apologising, and it was just this thing of like, was it a thing of the Hibs fans that you wanted this to work? You didn't want this to become public, like you didn't want this to become public the way it did, but he'd won a trophy. He'd won the first trophy since '92. He'd really kind of taken Hibs to a new level. Like, was there this feeling that this was just crashing down?
Aye, at that point, you couldn't see a way back for it, because I think you knew either the manager's going to need to go, or he's going to have to rebuild that squad, and it was too good a squad to tear apart. And something had to give with it, and I think as soon as the news of that broke, the revolt that players had gone to Rod Peach's house, the writing was on the wall. Like, you knew it was not going to end in a good way.
And despite obviously the getting into that next season, Hibs won 7 of their first 9 games. They obviously beat Celtic at Easter Road and then go to Ibrox and win that Murphy game you're talking about. But a really bad run after that where they don't win in 12. And obviously in the middle of that, Collins he kind of resigns. Like, how does that how does it go from so good to so bad? Like, it's just weird when you look at this and you're thinking, how does that happen?
I think Collins lost a lot of credibility. So he'd lost, depending who you listen to. Because we've spoken to, like I said, we had some players on the podcast before, and we were speaking to Lewis Stevenson about it, and he had nothing but good things to say for Collins. He's like, well, he gave me my break, and he trusted me to play me. And he's very loath to criticise him. Ivan Sproul was slightly different. He was kind of a bit happy to sort of say he didn't have the man management skills. But I think Collins just lost key players in the dressing room and players that he needed to be performing week in, week out for him, that he could no longer rely on. And I think once you hit that stage, and he started to lose a bit of the faith of the support, the team's performances dropped away. And almost one of the other significant things is Collins' signings were abysmal.
They were.
I can't think of really any signing. I try to rake my brains here.
Do you want me to run a few of them? Do you want me to run a...
Go for it, because I mean, I could rattle off some of the poor ones. Spend money on Alan O'Brien. Yeah. Alan O'Brien was awful. Mm-hmm. Absolutely awful.
Brian Kerr came in. Brian Kerr's actually a really nice guy, and I think he did okay at Hibs. He done better in Motherwell, I think, but...
He was all right. He scored the winner against Hearts at Tynecastle. Yeah. And he gets kind of remembered fondly for that, but I think a lot of folk remember him for his sort of, again, inverted commas, unseen work. Mm-hmm. He was one of these players that he was there, but we didn't really know what he did.
Clayton Donaldson?
Again, had a good career. Clayton Donaldson got a hat-trick against Kilmarnock one game, but it just never worked for him at Hibs, whether it was that he was never got the service that he needed or whatever, but nah, not a successful signing.
Thierry Gattuso.
Hong Kong Thierry. Yeah, not very good. He was quite a physical player. I think his head's a nickname, but yeah, not a success.
A player who actually had Collins signed, who went on to actually do quite well, he went to Inverness and St Johnstone and did okay. Felipe Meret.
Meret was all right.
He was at Chelsea, wasn't he?
We signed for Chelsea, and he did all right at Hibs. There was something about how he left. I can't remember. He didn't leave under the best of circumstances. I don't know if he'd sort of had a dig at the fans or something like that, and because he was sort of one of the targets for the Boo Boys. Mm-hmm. He just never turned on enough. He was capable of better than he showed at Hibs.
Did he not I think he get fined for an assault or something? Was that?
That would be about right. I
think. And Macalambi, who I thought was all right, to be fair.
Joe, Macalambi suffered from the legacy of Tony Mowbray's goalkeeper signings.
Yeah.
So he had one sort of really awful moment where he kicked the ball off. I can't remember who it was at Aberdeen. He just booted it off the back of his guy's head, and it went over him and into the back of the net. Mm-hmm. And then when Yogi took over, I think he accused Macalambi of bottling a game against Rangers. He just said he wasn't brave enough, or he was a coward or something like this, and that was the end of Macalambi. But he was all right. Like, he was, I think if you'd stuck with him, he was a decent enough keeper.
Was Rankin and Nash Collins signings?
Collins or John Hughes, I think.
I think it was.
Maybe even Mixu. I'm trying to remember the order of the managers.
I think it was Mixu.
Aye. But again, Colin Nash should get a great record of scoring in the Premier League.
Yeah.
I just remember him being offside. It was like sort of every game, just relentlessly offside.
He's now broke into management with Trinent. He's a really nice guy.
He's
a lovely, lovely guy. Ian Murray came back as well. But yeah, I mean, it kind of ends really badly. It absolutely does. And I think there's no way of saying anything other than that. But I'm going to ask you a wee what-if question as we close up the show. If Hibs had the budget and they didn't need to sell them, so Brown stays, Thomson stays, Caldwell, Whittaker, Murphy, Riordan, O'Connor. 2 years later, do they split the Old Firm? Do they win the title?
They'd be close to it, aye. I think we need a keeper. That was probably my only caveat. I think every other position we were well covered. I mean, if you could have taken like Murphy on the left, Whittaker on the right, Brown and Thomson in the middle, Sproul, Fletcher, Riordan, O'Connor.
Yeah,
I mean, you look at the careers that they have, there's no doubt they could have played at that level, and if we'd kept them together, frightening.
And how do you look back in this period? Because obviously it is, it's not a case of what if, it's more a case of these players were obviously huge parts of Hibs' legacies, and they've obviously went on to have really good careers. Do you look back on it with pride at how well they've done and how fortunate you are to have kind of seen them in the flesh as in your own club?
Definitely, and I think when all said and done, so we won the cup, and it would have been a travesty if we hadn't won something with that group. They needed something tangible to show for it. They won the cup, but the legacy that they have is that we finished the stadium, we built the training centre.
Yeah.
It sort of laid the foundations for what should be a successful Hibs team going forward. I mean, and it's thanks to the money that we recouped for these players. It's nice to see players that have come through at your youth team go on and do good things elsewhere. Like I like to say, it's like McGinn doing well for Scotland. You'll not hear a Hibs fan say a bad word about John McGinn because we've got that connection to him.
Aye, and that's the thing. Like, see, with like young players, like you instantly see because you've seen them. It's like your own kids. It's like you see them maturing in front of your eyes, and you think that John McGinn's a good example. I mean, John McGinn, we're recording this tonight. He just a couple of nights after I think he's made his 50th cap for Scotland.
50th cap,
like,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and you wouldn't have thought that when he was coming through. You would thought like, yeah, he's going to go on and do quite well, but you didn't see that, and you certainly didn't see like the likes of Brown going on and doing what he did for Saints. He won 21 trophies. Do you know what I mean?
Something like that, ridiculous, yeah.
And it's this thing of pride, and it must be just like some did quite well, like Brown, Caldwell had a good career. Some didn't maybe hit the heights that you thought they would, but there's always this thing of when you think of them, you think of their time at Hibs, and it must just be a lot of pride.
Definitely, yeah, a lot of pride, a lot of happiness about it.
Absolutely, Matty. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on the show. You must have really enjoyed looking back in that period.
Aye, it's grand, grand. It was send me to sleep with some happy memories tonight, definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in. Please follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. We will be going to the other side of Edinburgh for next week's show as we look at the infamous time of Vladimir Romanov's ownership of Hearts. Thank you very much for everyone that's tuned in. We'll see you soon. Cheers.